What I love most about this particular bike, this 1969 CB350, is the redundant simplicity of the design and the performance aspects. It's so much fun to ride because all it has is what it needs to run and to operate and to get you where you want to go in the fashion that you want to do it. The speed, the handling, the lightness of the bike, everything works really well. It's a succinct ride and it feels like a toy motorcycle. It is probably the most fun bike to ride. Dangerously fast for what it is, stops appropriately, and everywhere I take this bike, there's a circle of people around it every time I park it, and it's so much fun to talk about it and to share ideas in this community of bike builders. And that's what I like most about this particular bike. This is Dustin Kott from Kott Motorcycles. We're here in my shop and we're basically looking at a 1969 CB350 Twin. The theme is sticking with celebrating the vintage aesthetic of these bikes, bringing in some performance enhancement, but really just repurposing and recreating this motorcycle into something that's more interesting. This was a joint project. I was hired on basically to, given carte blanche too, artistically, a guy dropped this off and said, hey, I'd like for you to build this out the way you see fit, and then we'll sell it jointly. And that's kind of what gave birth to this particular project. This is a piece that I've started making recently. It's made the same way that the seats are made, but it's just a small fairing. And oftentimes on these CBs or on any custom build, you have to be mindful of a void that can be created, whether the headlight's out too far, and then you have a height differentiation between the triple clamp versus the tank versus the headlight. What I really did on this bike was created this for an aesthetic fullness and to bring a color implementation into the front of the build. The reason I did it is especially because I've got this 4.5-inch CEV headlight. It's fitted with a speedometer in here, and that's why I used it, but it's a 4.5-inch headlight versus a stock, which would be up to 7 inches. And so if it was just the headlight, it would have looked extremely insignificant aesthetically. And so it was a perfect opportunity to make yet another one of these bikini fairings, if you will. And then it's been perforated here just to add some interest to it with this chrome mesh behind the lightning holes. The tank that I used on this particular bike is a GS750 Suzuki tank. The reason I used it, the main reason I used it was, again, to appropriate the height between the triple clamp and the height of the tank. Certain bikes can have, it's a real tangent when you have a height differentiation with the triple clamp and then the tank and headlight. This, what it did was it appropriated that height and it gave it a fullness. It just gave it kind of an aesthetic fullness to where that tangent no longer exists. It also looks a lot more race inspired, bigger capacity, longer, wider. That's why these front indentations have been offered up. Just to avoid thumb pinching and also to create room to maintain as much steering radius as possible on this bike. It's fitted with a starter button that I've been using lately. What I had to do was switch out the battery, which is tucked underneath this seat, to a battery that had the cranking amps to do it. But honestly, now that this is in place, the starter motor, I'm not unhappy with the way that it looks. And then the flip hatch that used to be on here has been cut off. And then there was a piece that was welded in place just to fill in this area. If we had left this piece out, you would add a giant void between the top nut and the beginning of the tank. So I cut out a piece and welded it in place here. Then we just body worked the filler cap and left some of these lines just for interest, just to create those shadows and that kind of interest in that area. Knee indentations were given to this bike. I'm 6'1", so when I ride this bike, I look kind of funny. I look like a circus bear on a unicycle. So these were very crucial as far as ride control. The rear sets have been moved. With longer legs, my knee falls right into that pocket, and I'm able to grip the tank with my knees, and it helps me with the handling. especially because this is such a lightweight toy motorcycle. You can throw this thing around like it's a bicycle, and having optimal control over it is so much fun. It's probably the most fun bike that I have in my shop right now. The seat was made almost incongruently small to the tank. That's been something that I've been inspired by and motivated by artistically and creatively, is to recapture that vintage Manx look. The old TT racers and things always had that sort of incongruence between the size of the tank and seat. This has been made out of quarter round bar steel, wrapped in sheet steel, and then for continuity's sake, it's been given these lightning holes in the rear, and we've put in this mesh plating behind the holes. The original thought behind this lighting that I've done this on a lot of my builds. I have these holes here because oftentimes the light is tucked up underneath onto this relocation table that's been welded into this frame. But this light, just because of the way this bike sits, it had to be much lower, so it's a lot more visible. Normally, these lightning holes under a braking situation would be emitting a lot of ambient light through the holes, and that's why they're there. The frame on this, if you're familiar with the CB350 frame, has been really heavily modified. Again, there's a battery tray that's been welded in place, but because of this pressed steel frame, there's a tubular aspect to it, but the top half is pressed steel. These can be really unattractive on the CB350 frame. So this has been cut, and then these pieces have been sculpted in to make a roundness here. That was a lot of work, and that's important. There's certain things that I'm glad that it doesn't stand out, because it means that I succeeded at what I was trying to do, which is just to add this element to it without drawing a lot of attention to it. We maintained the factory wheels, the stock steel wheels. They've just been powder coated black, just to give it kind of an aesthetic heaviness on the bottom half of the bike, because these things are so featherweight looking, and also just performance-wise and everything else. It's a really light, dainty bike, and so I wanted to add sort of an aggressiveness to the bottom half of the chassis. The hubs have been heavily polished, and we've fitted this with Buchanan stainless spokes. This is a new piece too. This doubles as a chain guard / license plate holder, and unfortunately, in a lot of states now, you're finding that it's not legal anymore to run a vertical plate. So there's going to be probably a design change to where these are adjustable, to where there might be an Allen bolt or something to where you can flip this sideways or run it vertically. The pipe choice on this bike really, it brought an extra element to this machine. I had an entirely different muffler at one time, and then I put these rounded, they're called Road Hawks. I put these rounded Road Hawks on, and it gave it this 60s appeal that the other pipe just simply didn't bring to the build, and I love the look of this. It's very effortless, and it's got just a really smooth style to it. This part from here back is an extension that was added. This was cut, mandrel bent, so we can kick up the pipes at a more aggressive angle, and again, to recapture that vintage race appeal that I've always been inspired by. The rear set design was pretty neat on this. This is a factory piece. On these 350 frames, this at one time was not only the rear pipe hold, but it was also the passenger foot peg. And so this piece that's part of the frame has always been there. All I had to do was hand cut this rear set plate to fit it into that bolt pattern. And this is already threaded, so it just took two 6x10 Allen heads to hold this whole thing together. And it was just, I love the simplicity of it, like using the original levers just to maintain that vintage appeal that I've always liked. This was kind of an interesting thing here. It was just kind of a sprocket reveal, but just to shave off some of the bulkiness and of this engine case, this cover. We just sculpted it in a way that kind of created an angularity and an aggressiveness. Instead of the flat, bulky, sort of not a very well thought out piece. This is something I've done on a couple of builds now. This is, instead of running an obnoxious splash guard here, obviously this is a California friendly bike. I don't expect this thing to be ridden out in the dirt or in the rain or anything, but this is just a front fender that's been cut down and then repurposed. There's a tab that's statically welded to the swing arm, And this front fender piece is just acting as a splash guard to keep any, as much debris out of here as possible. So in order to create this triangulation in the frame and to really give it that bare bones look, the components are up underneath the seat cowl, and then this regulator rectifier has been welded in just in between these frame rails. Just slightly behind the custom tank mount here, but this is just a great spot. It gets the ventilation that it needs because it is displacing heat, and it looks, it's non-intrusive. I think it was a great spot for it. We're running the stock carburetors. Mikuni makes a decent option for these bikes, but these carburetors are very hard to find now. So I thought, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I love the vintage look of them, and so we decided to keep the stock carburation. I've had velocity stacks on this, but it really actually helps to restrict some of the airflow. So we decided to use just some pod filters. And if you come to the front here, there's a couple of things that we maintained. The visible spring look, I love that look. Only on these smaller capacity CBs, the twins, do you get the capability of running this exposed spring. And it just has such an antique look to it. It maintained the front drum brake, had all this blue zinc plated, and then the hub stay's been chromed, and just to bring a little bit of attention to that area and clean it up, make sure it works as good as a front drum can. But this bike is so light that it doesn't really require that much stopping power. And I find I really enjoy the front drum brakes. I like the look of them. I like the cleanliness of the bars because you don't have any master cylinder. And the performance of this bike, I couldn't ask for anything more. Just to bring a little more attention and just a cool factor to this front hub, we added these lightning holes through this front hub. Without it, it looks like a dinner plate or something. It's just too obnoxious. And so it needed something. It needed some kind of something that was a little more appealing, like those lightning holes, and that worked out really well. Clip-on bars, 33 mil, nothing to them, just pinch clamp style. And then it's got these stainless rings that have been put in place to appropriate the difference in height between the clip-on bar and the bottom of the triple clamp. But basically a small damper there. This is that cleanliness I was talking about with the front drum brake. There's just no master cylinder. All it is a small lever, and that's all it takes. And I love that simplicity. Again, we're running the bars at this height just so we can avoid thumb pinching into this area where the tank's been indented, and also create space for the bars to come into this area without denting the tank. Factory headers. They've been re-chromed, and then of course an addition has been added. And I've always been inspired by dual pipes on any bike. It gives you, it harkens back to that vintage European styling. And so that's what I love about the twins, is that you get the opportunity to do that, to have the dual exhaust look. And then, like I said before, on certain builds I've done in the past, we've had to manipulate the kickstart lever to clear the rear sets. And that's exactly what we've done here. And again, it adds kind of a neat look to it. The rear set has been designed, we're doing an over and over design. So we've got the tab at the top, and we've basically flipped the bell crank upside down. And so we're pulling it, which is mechanically always a better way to actuate anything, as a pull. And so we've pulled it here with an over and over design. And this is kind of a neat piece too. This is an off-center eccentric that's been drilled off. It's offset here. So when we loosen this, we can adjust the height of the pedal, whether we want higher or lower. We can adjust it, and that was kind of a neat piece. Just something that was thoughtful, in so much as you never know who's going to be riding this bike and how they might want to appropriate the levers. The main thing about this bike that I love the most is just the raw simplicity of it. I mean, there's absolutely nothing to it, and I feel like if it looks that simple, I feel like I really succeeded in the design implements and also the execution of the build, because it's got only what it needs, and that's what this bike was intended for. And if that was the case, which it was, I think we've succeeded at it.